You probably don't feel like a different person yet. That's the part no one mentions. There's this assumption that when something inside you shifts, you'll know it immediately, that there will be some clear signal, a moment of clarity, maybe even relief. But that's not how it works. What actually happens is you start to feel off, not in a way you can point to, not in a way that makes sense when you try to explain it to someone else. You just notice that trading doesn't feel the way it used to. And because it doesn't feel the way it used to, you assume something has gone wrong. You used to get more worked up about trades. You used to feel more. Now there are entire sessions where you place trades and it feels like you're watching someone else do it. Not in a dissociative way, just in a way that lacks the charge it used to have. You look at a setup and you take it or you don't. And either way, there's no drama, no internal argument, no need to convince yourself. And this absence, this lack of emotional texture, feels like a problem. Because if you're not feeling it, how do you know you still care? How do you know you're not just going through the motions? The confusion comes from expecting progress to feel like intensity. You think that if you're improving, you should feel sharper, more focused, more engaged. But what actually happens is the opposite. The noise dies down. The urgency fades. The thing that used to feel like a battle starts to feel like a routine. And routines don't feel significant. They feel boring. So you start to wonder if you've lost something. If maybe the version of you that cared more was actually the better trader, even if that version also made more mistakes. There's a specific type of doubt that shows up here. And it doesn't feel like doubt. It feels like realism. It feels like you're finally seeing clearly. You look at your results, and they're not bad, but they're not extraordinary either. You look at your process, and it's solid, but it's not exciting. You look at the time you're putting in, and it feels fine, just fine. And fine starts to feel like failure when you've been expecting transformation. You start to think that if this is all there is, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe you're not cut out for this. Maybe the people who succeed are wired differently, and you're just someone who got partway there and plateaued. But here's what you're missing. Plateaus don't feel flat. They feel like decline. Because you're comparing yourself to the version of you that was still climbing, still discovering, still getting those little hits of progress that made everything feel worthwhile. That version had momentum. This version has consistency. And consistency doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you feedback. It just quietly accumulates in the background while you're busy wondering if you've stalled out. The part that really messes with you is that you can't see what's changed. You're looking for evidence in your P&L, in your win rate, in some metric that proves you've leveled up. But the change isn't there. It's in how you respond when a trade goes against you. It's in the fact that you don't need to talk yourself into following your rules anymore. It's in the absence of the internal negotiation you used to have every single time you were supposed to cut a loss or take a profit. Those things used to require effort. Now they don't. And because they don't require effort, you don't notice them. You don't give yourself credit for them. You just assume that's how it's supposed to be. You used to think that becoming a good trader meant reaching a point where trading felt easy and obvious, where you'd look at a chart and just know what to do. And doing it would feel natural. And, in a way, that's what's happening. But easy doesn't feel the way you thought it would. It doesn't feel like mastery. It feels like absence. The absence of struggle. The absence of doubt. The absence of the emotional loop that used to make trading feel important. And when something stops feeling important, you start to question whether you should still be doing it. This is the point where a lot of people quit. Not because they're failing. Not because they can't handle the losses. But because the thing that used to give them identity doesn't anymore. Trading used to be this challenge they were taking on, this problem they were solving, this skill they were building. It gave them something to think about, something to work on, something to define themselves against. And now it's just a thing they do. And if it's just a thing they do, why keep doing it? Why not do something that feels more alive, more urgent, more like it matters? The answer isn't that trading matters more than you think. The answer is that the version of you that needed it to feel urgent is gone. That version needed the stakes to feel high because that's what made it real. That version needed the emotional feedback because that's how they knew they were engaged. But you don't need that anymore. And the fact that you don't need it feels like loss because you're still expecting yourself to operate the way you used to. You're still expecting to feel the way you used to, but you can't. Because you're not the same person. You're waiting for permission to feel good about where you are. You're waiting for some external confirmation that this quiet, steady, borderline boring version of trading is actually progress. But no one's going to give you that confirmation. Because from the outside, you look the same. Your results might even look worse. At least in the short term, because you're no longer taking the high variance trades that used to give you those occasional big wins. You're trading smaller, you're trading safer. You're trading in a way that doesn't produce fireworks. And fireworks are what people notice. Consistency is invisible until enough time has passed that the compounding becomes undeniable. But you're not there yet. You're in the gap. The part where the old way has stopped working and the new way hasn't produced results yet. This is where the doubt gets specific. You start to think that maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe you've become too cautious. Maybe you've lost your edge. You look at traders who are still taking big swings, still posting big wins, still operating with that aggressive confidence you used to have, and you wonder if you've neutered yourself, if you've optimized yourself into mediocrity. if the process you've built is actually just a way of avoiding risk instead of managing it. And here's the thing, you might be right. It's possible that you've overcorrected, that you've swung too far in the direction of caution, and now you're leaving money on the table. But the reason you can't tell is because you're still using the old metrics. You're still judging yourself based on how much you're making per trade, how often you're winning, how exciting it feels. But those metrics were designed for the old version of you. The version that was optimizing for short-term feedback, the version that needed to feel like they were winning in order to keep going. This version of you is optimizing for something else, for sustainability, for repeatability, for the kind of trading you can do for years without burning out. And those metrics don't produce the same kind of feedback. There's a version of this where you push through, and 6 months from now you look back and realize that this was the period where everything solidified, where the foundation you built actually held, where the consistency you didn't notice became the thing that carried you. But there's also a version where you quit right now, and 6 months from now you look back and think you made the right call, because maybe trading isn't what you want anymore. Maybe the identity shift you're experiencing isn't about becoming a better trader. Maybe it's about becoming someone who doesn't need trading to feel like they're progressing. The hard part is that you can't know which version is true until you're already in it. You can't know if this quiet phase is the foundation or the end until enough time has passed that the answer is obvious. And by then, the decision has already been made. Either you stayed and it worked, or you left and you moved on. But right now, in the middle of it, you have no idea. And that uncertainty feels unbearable because you're used to knowing. You're used to being able to look at your results and your process and your emotional state and extrapolate where you're headed. But you can't do that anymore because the rules have changed. The version of you that could read those signals is gone. And the version of you that's here now doesn't have enough data yet. You're not stuck. You're transitioning. But transitions don't feel like progress. They feel like limbo. They feel like you're neither here nor there, neither the person you were nor the person you're becoming. And limbo is exhausting because it requires you to keep going without knowing if you're going in the right direction. It requires you to trust a process that hasn't proven itself yet. It requires you to bet on a future version of yourself that you can't see and aren't sure you believe in. The reason this phase is so dangerous is because the doubt feels rational. It's not the panicked emotional doubt you had early on when you were losing money and didn't know what you were doing. That kind of doubt was easy to dismiss because it was obviously fear-based. This doubt is different. It's calm. It's measured. It's backed by evidence. You can point to your results and say, look, this isn't working. You can point to your emotional state and say, look, I don't even care anymore. You can point to the time you're spending and say, look, this isn't worth it. And all of those things are true. But they're not the whole truth. They're true in the context of the old version of you. The version that was optimizing for different things. The version that needed different signals to know they were on track. But you're not that version anymore. And the signals that version needed don't apply. You're in a different game now. One where the feedback is slower. Where the wins are smaller but more reliable. Where the emotional highs are gone, but so are the emotional lows. And you have no reference point for this game. You don't know what good looks like. You don't know what progress feels like. You don't even know if you're playing it right. Because no one talks about this part. Everyone talks about the struggle and the breakthrough. No one talks about the in-between. The part where you're not struggling anymore but you're not winning either. The part where you've solved the problems you used to have but you haven't figured out what comes next. There's a specific type of trader who makes it through this phase, and it's not the ones who are the most talented or the most disciplined. It's the ones who can tolerate ambiguity. The ones who can keep going without needing to know if it's working. The ones who can sit in the discomfort of not being sure and just keep executing. Not because they believe it will pay off. Not because they have faith in the process. But just because they haven't decided to stop yet. That's it. That's the whole thing. They just haven't made the decision to quit. And because they haven't made that decision, they keep going. And because they keep going, eventually enough time passes that the results start to show up. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that feels like vindication. Just in a way that makes it clear that something has changed. But you're not there yet. You're still in the part where it feels like nothing is changing. Where every day feels the same. Where the work you're putting in doesn't seem to be producing anything. And the temptation is to conclude that this means it's not working. That if it were working, you'd feel different. You'd see different results. You'd have some kind of confirmation that you're on the right track. But that's not how this works. The confirmation comes later. Much later. Long after you've stopped looking for it. Long after you've given up on needing it. And by the time it shows up, you won't even care anymore. Because you'll be a different person. Someone who doesn't need external validation to know they're doing the right thing. Someone who just does what they do because that's who they are now. The shift happens so gradually that you can't see it while it's happening. You only see it in retrospect. You look back at the person you were 6 months ago, a year ago, and you realize that person wouldn't recognize you. Not because you're trading differently, but because you relate to trading differently. It used to be this thing you were trying to conquer, this challenge you were trying to solve, this identity you were trying to build. And now it's just what you do. It's not your whole identity anymore. It's not the thing you think about constantly. It's not the thing that determines your mood or your self-worth. It's just a part of your life, a part you take seriously, a part you're good at, but still just a part. And that shift, From trading being everything to trading being something feels like a downgrade, because everything felt important. Everything felt meaningful. Everything felt like it mattered. And something just feels ordinary, and ordinary feels like settling. Like you've lowered your standards. Like you've given up on the version of yourself that wanted more. But you haven't given up. You've just stopped needing trading to be more than it is. You've stopped needing it to complete you or define you or prove something about you. And that's not a downgrade. That's just what it looks like when something stops being an obsession and starts being a skill. The problem is that skills don't feel impressive from the inside. They feel routine. They feel automatic. They feel like anyone could do them. And because they feel like anyone could do them, you don't give yourself credit for them. You look at what you're doing and it seems simple, obvious, not worth celebrating. But the reason it seems simple is because you've internalized it. You've done it enough times that it's no longer a conscious process. It's just what you do. And the fact that it's just what you do means it's working. Because the goal was never to make trading feel hard. The goal was to make it feel easy. But easy doesn't feel like an accomplishment. It just feels like ease. You're probably thinking about quitting more than you're admitting. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way where you've made a decision. Just in a way where the thought is there, in the background, every time you sit down to trade. Every time you review your results. Every time you think about the time you're spending and what else you could be doing with it. The thought is just there. And the fact that it's there feels like a problem, because you think that if you really wanted this, you wouldn't be thinking about quitting. You think that if you were really cut out for this, the thought wouldn't even occur to you. But that's not how it works. The thought occurs to everyone. The difference is that some people treat it like a signal, and some people treat it like noise. The ones who treat it like a signal use it as evidence that they should stop, that they've lost the passion, that they're not committed enough. The ones who treat it like noise just notice it and keep going. They don't engage with it. They don't analyze it. They don't let it mean anything. They just acknowledge that the thought is there, and then they do the next thing they were going to do anyway. And over time, the thought shows up less. Not because they've convinced themselves to stay, but because they've stopped giving it power. You're looking for a reason to stay. Some clear, compelling, undeniable reason that makes it obvious that you should keep going. But there isn't one. There's no moment of clarity coming. There's no sign that's going to appear and make everything make sense. There's just the question of whether you keep going or you don't. And that question doesn't have a right answer. It just has your answer. And your answer right now is probably, I don't know. Which is fine. You don't have to know. You just have to decide whether you're okay with not knowing and doing it anyway, or whether you need to know and therefore can't. Most people need to know. They need certainty. They need to feel like they're moving towards something clear and definable. And if you're one of those people, trading might not be for you anymore. Not because you can't do it, but because the version of trading that's sustainable, the version that actually works long-term, doesn't provide that kind of certainty. It provides consistency, reliability, repeatability, but not certainty. And if you need certainty, you'll keep looking for it, and you'll keep being disappointed when you don't find it, and eventually you'll burn out and quit. Not because you failed, but because you were optimizing for the wrong thing. But if you're someone who can tolerate not knowing, who can sit in the ambiguity and just keep executing, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because this is the filter. This is the part that separates the people who make it from the people who don't. Not based on talent, not based on discipline, but based on whether they can keep going when there's no immediate payoff, when there's no emotional reward, when there's nothing but the work itself and the faint, uncertain hope that it might eventually lead somewhere. The people who make it through this phase don't do it because they believe in themselves. They do it because they've stopped needing to believe. They've stopped needing the work to feel meaningful in order to do it. They've stopped needing to see progress in order to keep going. They just do it because they haven't decided to stop, and that's enough. It doesn't feel like enough. It feels like the bare minimum. But the bare minimum, sustained over time, is what actually works, not the big dramatic efforts, not the intense emotional commitment, just the quiet, boring, unglamorous repetition of doing the thing, even when it doesn't feel like it matters. You used to think that becoming a good trader meant reaching a point where you loved it, where you were passionate about it, where it filled you up and gave you purpose. And maybe for some people that's true. But for most people, that's not what happens. What happens is it stops being a source of identity and starts being a source of income. It stops being the thing you think about all the time and starts being the thing you do for a few hours and then move on from. And that's not a failure. That's just what it looks like when something stops being a project and starts being a part of your life. The version of you that needed trading to be everything is gone. And the version of you that's here now doesn't need it to be anything other than what it is. And that's the shift. That's the thing that's changed. You're not stuck. You're not failing. You're just not the person you were when you started. And the person you are now doesn't get the same emotional rewards from trading that the old version did, which means you have to decide if you're okay with that. If you can keep going without needing it to feel important, without needing it to feel exciting, without needing it to prove anything about you. And if you can't, that's fine. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to decide that this version of trading isn't what you want, that you'd rather do something that feels more alive, more engaging, more meaningful. But if you do walk away, you should know what you're walking away from. You're not walking away from failure. You're walking away from the exact thing you were trying to build. The calm, consistent, boring version of trading that actually works. The version that doesn't give you highs but also doesn't give you lows. The version that doesn't make you feel like a hero but also doesn't make you feel like a failure. The version that's just steady. And steady doesn't feel like progress. It feels like stagnation, but that's because you're still measuring yourself against movement, against change, against the feeling of getting better. But you're not getting better anymore. You're just being consistent. And consistency doesn't feel like anything. It's invisible. It's boring. It's the absence of drama. And if you need drama to feel alive, you're going to interpret that absence as emptiness. But it's not emptiness. It's just what it looks like when you've stopped needing validation from the work itself. The traders who last aren't the ones who love it. They're the ones who've made peace with the fact that they don't need to. They're the ones who've stopped expecting trading to give them something it was never designed to give. They're the ones who figured out that the work doesn't have to feel meaningful in order to be worth doing. That the process doesn't have to be exciting in order to be effective. That the results don't have to be dramatic in order to be real. You're in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And that space is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be, because you're not supposed to stay there. You're supposed to move through it, but you can't move through it by forcing it. You can't think your way out of it. You can't analyze your way out of it. You just have to keep going until enough time has passed that you realize you're already on the other side. And by the time you realize it, you won't care anymore. Because you'll be someone who doesn't need to know they've made it in order to keep going. You'll just be someone who trades. And that'll be enough.